he felt in some sense that in Being in Time, he had riveted his attention too exclusively on man, and that this philosophy was a powerful form of humanism, but there was no systematic grasp of what the human being is rooted in. And of course,
the world of nature,
yes,
the material world,
the cosmos.
Yes, the cosmos.
In a sense,
yes.
You see, in a sense, Heidegger, I would say, is a follower of Parmenides. You see, this Greek sage who had this electrifying idea. You see, the all is one. For the first time in human history, the notion of the totality of being as one thing, you see, to which we have to relate ourselves in our thinking. And Heidegger's written about Parmenides, but now in this sense, he feels that precisely what has happened with modern culture is we've lost those cosmic roots in a way, that we've been detached from this sense of our connection with the whole or the all.
Why should this have happened specifically in modern culture? Isn't it part of the human condition as such?
It is part in the sense that man is a being who flies away from truth even as he pursues it. But I think one of the reasons it happens specifically in modern culture is, of course, we build up a much more intricate technical society. We're more encased in the sheer human framework of things than people were at one time.
Simply because we live in a much more complex, complicated
We live in an air-conditioned nightmare, to borrow the term of Henry Miller. But we live more and more in a man-created environment, if we consider it all down the line, from our air conditioning to everything else. And our urban complexes, I mean, I can't help but think, coming to London, that London is a very different city from Shakespeare's London, which existed that much closer to the countryside. You could probably, very shortly walk out. And so on.
Well, what are the main themes, then, of the later Heidegger, as distinct from the earlier?
Yes, well, you see, the later Heidegger is not systematic, or not even systematic in the way in which he attempts to be in Being in Time. The later Heidegger is primarily, or not primarily, but very centrally concerned with the problem of poetry and art. And in some sense, you see, and the problem of technology. One of the tasks of philosophers in this period is to try to think through what technology involves. He felt that, I think, modern thinking is either too superficial, too inauthentic with regard to the subject of technology. You know, on the one hand, you find people very flippant attitude, they're against machines, or they're for technology. It makes no sense, he said, for man at this particular juncture of history to be for or against technology. We're obviously committed to technology. I mean, if you removed it, the whole thing would collapse. We are. That's part of the stake of our existence. It's part of our gamble. On the other hand, you see, there is a point which I think the atomic bomb has brought forth for human consciousness generally, that technology has drastic possibilities. Hitherto people have protested against it as local nuisances or causing unemployment, sabotage, and so on. But the notion that suddenly mankind could self-destruct suddenly showed us the fearful possibilities within the technical complex. And now Heidegger was concerned with thinking through where in the historical destiny of man the roots of his technical being lie, and where it may possibly be carrying him, you see.
But how does his concern with poetry relate to his concern with technology? Unless he sees these as two opposite sides of the same kind.
They are opposite. Because the thing, well, as you well know from other branches of contemporary philosophy, there's a certain disposition on the part of some philosophers when they're examining language to treat it as a calculus. It's an instrument which can be manipulated and controlled. It's a formal calculus and so on. And in this sense, this represents an extension of technical thinking, you see, even to the domain of language. Now, the thing about a poem in Heidegger's view is that it eludes the demands of our will. The poet cannot will to write a poem. He cannot will it. It comes. And actually, we as his readers can't will our response. We have to submit to it and be passive to it. You see, what Heidegger connects the technological scent of this civilization is with its Faustian will, which becomes eventually the
Which goes
Nietzschean
right
will,
back
the will
again to
power.
man's determination to
Right.
master nature,
Right.
which is the basis of our whole modern
Exactly.
culture, modern
Exactly.
technology, modern science, and so on, which
Yes,
he
I
is
would-
in rebellion against.
And I think the key quotation here would be Francis Bacon. We must learn, who is really a prophet of the new science in this respect. I always think of Bacon in this respect as being a publicity man for the new science, but a publicity man of genius. He says, we must put nature to the rack to compel it to answer our questions, which is a very dramatic way of endorsing the experimental method. But now you stop to think, even if we put poor nature to the rack, poor tortured nature, we have to listen to her responses. We have, in some sense, to give ourselves to be receptive. There's a point at which our twisting, you see, has to submit to whatever is there to be.
This really does
Yes, sure.
represent a basic break with the tradition, doesn't it? Because even, as it were, revolutionary philosophies within the tradition, like Marxism, for example, take it for granted that the conquest of nature is man's business. It's what human life is all about and what social life is all about.
It's rather curious that Heidegger's view of freedom is a very quiet one and subtle and soft. Our fundamental freedom is the freedom, if we can manage it, to become open, to let truth happen. And most of us in our lives are shut off in our personal lives in one way or another, doesn't matter which, from truth in our dealings with other people. We have resistances which can't be breached and so on. But sometimes there's a fissure in this wall that shuts us off, and we are able to let be. We no longer seek to compel or you see, the whole of the later Heidegger is really a prolonged attack on the will to power as characterizing Western
An
civilization.
attack on this urge we have to dominate nature,
Right. And even,
dominate our environment.
And even dominate our own personal lives or dominate
Yes.
other people.
The view being that you only really understand reality when, in some sense, you submit yourself to it.
Modern society tends to depersonalize to a certain extent, that it gets larger and larger, more intricately organized and so on. And that the problem of the person, the individual as a unique being who cannot be completely assimilated into any framework, whether it's bureaucratic or conceptual or systematic, something of him is left out. I think this kind of emphasis is what it has brought forward, I think, most powerfully.